Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, addicts of all ages, welcome to Canadian Sober, eh? I'm your host and resident alcoholic, Dougie Fresh. So glad you're with us today. Today, I have a really good friend of mine who I met during the COVID pandemic, and I can honestly say he's probably about one of 5 people why this show even exists. I can be honest and tell you that today. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce my good friend from LA, Jim. How you doing today, Jim?
Dougie Fresh. It's good to be on here. My friend from the Six, right? Is that what they call
Yeah,
you?
the Six. Yeah, the Six.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Could you tell the listening audience, the many millions of Canadians out there, who Jim is?
So this is where I get in my story, Doug? Is this what I'm doing?
Go ahead, brother.
Oh man, Jim is a grateful recovering alcoholic. Man, I live in Los Angeles, blessed to be out here right now. 47 years young, Doug. 47 years young, and I've never felt better, honestly. Like the blessings of addiction recovery and just living a life completely different from the one I lived many years ago. Oh man, I can't say enough. But I think I'm digging into my story now. So man, Doug, my story, I think many of our stories, if your other guests here are on here about addiction recovery, whether it be alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever it may be, comes from a lot of childhood trauma. And I think what's really important when we talk about trauma in any form, if not, it's been, and childhood trauma equally, is it's not the acts of the trauma that had the biggest, that is important. It's how it affected the individual. My story started with a lot of childhood trauma, which was sexual assault, being molested at a very young age by men. Some people's story of trauma was because they got called ugly or fat when they were a kid. And that could have affected them just as greatly as my trauma affected me. So I don't like anybody to think that one form of trauma was more impactful than another, because none of us are here to say that. And I like to personally not have people feel one way or another about that. So but yeah, that was a part of where I think my addiction, when it kicked off in my teens, why it did. I was raised by a single mom back in the early 80s. I was born in 1976. So the 80s were a different time, Doug. You remember that, with the phones on the wall, the long extension cords. I had a paper route back in the day. Nobody knows what paper routes are anymore. I had those bags on the handlebars of my car, on my bicycle. I'd drive around the streets and throw the papers at the doors, and I'd hit the people's screen door and they'd scream at me. But so back then times were different, and I love it. I look back at with lots of smiles about my childhood. But I was raised by a single mom who really worked her tail off to provide for us, and in doing so, she was rarely home. She would let men move in. She had me very young. She had me when she's 15, 16 years old. So she was a child raising a child, and she wanted that male companionship for her as much as, in hindsight, I can remember now, that she wanted it for me to have a male role model in my life. But being a different time back then, there wasn't social media to look people up and find out what this person's all about. You didn't have technology to do background checks and stuff on people. So my mom would have let these guys move in, and unfortunately, in my childhood, a lot of them, took advantage and did things to me. So that's kind of where it started. But where it really started my addiction, and my story, is probably my early teen, my mid-teens. I don't think I drank until probably maybe 14, 15. But a lot of my story is me being very uncomfortable in my own skin. What do I mean when I say that? My last name's Hernandez, Doug. I don't speak Spanish. I've never been in a gang, and I'm from Los Angeles, so no tattoos. I've been in jail 12, 15 times in my life. I always ran wood. And if those of you don't know what that means in jail, you run wood is the white people. The white people are the woodpeckers. And so a Mexican in jail running wood is not something that's taken lightly in there by the Hispanics. So it caused me a lot of problems inside. And that just goes to, again, about how uncomfortable I was in my own skin. I didn't relate to the Hispanics, so I wanted to hang out with the white people. My last name's Hernandez. My dad was born in Zacatecas. He was barely around in my childhood, but when I went to see my dad and my dad's side of the family, a lot of them didn't even speak English. So even though my last name's Hernandez, I don't fit in over there because I don't speak Spanish. When I'm back home in Ventura, Beach City, I'm Mexican, so I don't fit in necessarily with the white people. A lot of my friends had two-parent households, so there was just a lot of difference that made me feel uncomfortable. But I mean, I remember that time, the first time I got alcohol in my system. And I hear this often is that first time I got alcohol in my system, man, that was the solution to all my uncomfortableness. That was a solution to me no longer feeling different, no longer having troubles talking to people. Doug, in high school and college, I played sports. I played football and baseball in high school and college. And I remember because playing football, I was the quarterback and I was the captain, and I could throw football far. I was on TV a lot. I was always asked to come down to the pep rallies and speak in front of the school. And I just remember how uncomfortable that made me feel. I hated it. I wasn't comfortable talking in front. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I had these things that had happened to me as a child. And then when I found out as a teenager that shit was some messed up stuff, I didn't know how to deal with it. So I just always pushed it in and pushed it down. And I was just never comfortable in my own skin. And I remember speaking at pep rallies and on the news and stuff after games, and I just was not comfortable. And then alcohol, man, it was just like, oh, where have we been in my whole life? And I think a lot of people can relate to that suffer from addiction or alcoholism. And I remember college stopped and sports stopped for me, and I had all this time on my hands. And so what did I do at that time? I just drank. I just went straight to drinking. Early 20s, drank every day, 24/7 drinker pretty much by the time I was 30. I had great times with alcohol. Never been married, but I was in 3 long-term relationships. A lot of self-loathing around alcohol. I've been in relationships where I just really manipulated, cheated, stole. I did some horrendous things to people that, took a lot of forgiveness on my own part in addiction recovery, to really get past a lot of counseling, a lot of therapy. I'm a huge advocate today on journaling. I see my therapist once a week still. As we get on to my story a little bit, I'll really dabble on what my today is like and how it's different. But, my addiction was those hard times where, just doing awful things to people that I told I loved, saying and doing awful things to people that meant a lot to me and just treating people really bad, in and out of jail. Doug, I think in my 30s in 1 year, I got 51, 53 times and went to psych wards. Addiction ended me up homeless in the streets of Los Angeles by the time I would think I was 37, 38. Lived out of my car. I couldn't keep a job all of a sudden. My girlfriends had kicked me out. Nobody wanted anything to do with me, my family. It spiraled my life out of control. The obsession of the alcohol and the drugs just overtook me, Doug. I was obsessed with it all. If I was having a conversation with you, but I didn't have drugs or alcohol in my hand, all I was thinking about was, what do I need to do to get it? Do I have enough? Do I have money? Do I need to commit a lick? Do I need to rob somebody? Do I need to get a gun? What do I need to do? Because I need this. So I could have been physically present with you, but I wasn't mentally there unless I was drinking or on drugs. And that just was the last 10 years before I got sober. It was no way to live life. I was homeless on the streets, just committing horrendous acts, doing horrible things. And that's what my life had gotten me to. The obsession of alcoholism and drug addiction had just really taken everything for me. And that was my new normal. And I look back and I'm just so grateful I'm not there anymore. They say what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So what happened is one day I had a appointment with my probation officer. I remember walking into LAX courthouse and walking up to my probation officer. And I didn't plan on saying this, walk into that meeting. I walked to the meeting because I was homeless and I didn't have a car. So I didn't plan on saying this, that aha moment or that spiritual awakening. But she looked at me. I remember her look in her eyes, and she looked at me and she just shook her head and she's like, "What is going on with you? You stink. You look like crap." Like, dude. And it just hit me. And right then in that moment, I remember saying to her, I'm like, "I need help. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know." And she made an appointment for me with a company called Homeless Healthcare of LA. I had an appointment with them the next day. I went there and they got me into a treatment center, a drug treatment center. And, being a person that didn't have any money and I was homeless, I didn't have insurance in Los Angeles. I thought you could only get into treatment if you had insurance and money, and I didn't have either. I wasn't aware that there was government funded programs. So they got me into a place called Phoenix House, which is a treatment center on the beach in Venice, on the beach. I was right on the boardwalk, 53 men, all of them straight out of prison or straight off the streets. So it definitely wasn't a bougie, nice drug treatment center. It was people that I had been in jail and in prison with pretty much many, many times, those types of people. And there wasn't a lot of recovery in there, but just like in every situation in your life, it is what you make it. If you go into it with a positive mindset and wanting to make the best out of it, you can make the best out of anything if that's what you want. And I went in there, and for the first time in my life, I surrendered. I surrendered to my higher power, who I call God, who I had resented for many, many years previous to this, because, what God would allow somebody to go through, what, I had been going through. And I hear that often. And when I hear that, I can definitely relate to the people that are saying it. And I just didn't, I was willing for the first time in my life to just shut up and listen and take direction. And, I got sober. And I remember that treatment center was a 6-month program. Afterwards, I went to a sober living facility for 2 months. And then it was time to do the real work. I think I had about 8-9 months of sobriety under my belt. But, Doug, those things that, I had done previous to going into treatment were still there. My credit score was still 380. I had gotten evicted from my apartments. I had no car. I had no driver's license. I had warrants out for my arrest. I was unemployable. Even if I got an apartment, I couldn't get lights on because I had gotten all my electricity turned off. So yeah, I'm 7-8 months sober, but like, now what? Like, I feel great, but I don't have a dollar in my pocket. Like, what do I do now? So then, like, life hit. I remember I got a job and I was able to, my family didn't want anything to do with me, and my uncles and my dads wouldn't co-sign for an apartment for me. So, I did what I did what I had to. I got a job and I was able to finally, a friend co-sign for an apartment for me, and I was able to get no apartment. And this shirt right here says "one day at a time," because I think that's a motto that, in addiction recovery, we really grasp onto that, because things can be overwhelming if you look at things big picture. And if I would have looked at things like, Jim, your credit score is 380, you have 2 warrants out for your arrest, you don't have a driver's license, you don't have a car, you have no. One day at a time, Doug. I finally went to court. I faced, that judge. I went to my 9 months of DUI classes. One day at a time, I got a job, fixed my credit score. One day at a time, I was able to get lights on. One day at a time, I got my driver's license back, and my credit score was still 480. But one day at a time, a friend was like, "I believe in you. Loan me some money to put a down payment on a used vehicle that I had to get with like a 17% interest rate or something." But one day at a time, I paid that 4-year loan off in 14 months, and my credit score skyrocketed. One day at a time, over 2 years, my life just made some just insurmountable changes. And I was just like, wow. That's right around the time that you and I met, online, and we did our first podcast around 2020 is when, I started facing all this stuff and just really getting into it. I became employable again. I started a fitness clothing line and dedicated to, inspiring individuals in addiction recovery to use physical fitness as a powerful tool in recovery. I had these changes in my life and I knew they were coming from somewhere. And I'd been such a selfish, narcissistic ass my whole life, and God in this program made me want to be something else. It was absolutely amazing. And so, when I started this clothing line, I told myself I'm going to donate 1 item of clothing for every item sold. Doug, over the last 3 years, I think I've been in skid rows all over the US 32 times. We've handed out over, I think, 14,000 items of clothing. Handed out over, I think, 1,600 meals to this day. I go back to the treatment centers, Homeless Healthcare of LA, who got me off the streets. I'm now a board member there. They asked me to be a board member. I've spoken at big events for them. They brought me on stage. They have dressed up super fancy in galas with politicians and mayors and stuff, and rubbing elbows. Phoenix House, the treatment center that took me in, I go back there once a month. I've given them at least 8,000 items of clothing. I speak there. I visit that facility once a month. They've asked me to do multiple things for them. The sober living that I went to for 2 months, I lead panels there every Tuesday. I've done that for 2 years. I start at 6 p.m. on the women's side and I go 7:30 over the men's side and I bring speakers, and that's how I give back and I give thanks. I've never forgotten the companies or people that had anything to do with getting me where I'm at today. It's just been such a blessing. Like recovery now, I heard many times, in meetings and whatnot, people say, just because you get a little bit of sober time, like life happens. And it was rough. The first couple of years, I'm not going to lie, it was still emotionally rough. I harbored a lot of resentments. I was working the program, but it just didn't come all the way. It was a lot better than it was previously, but it still wasn't, I would say, oh, things are great. And compared to what they were amazing, but you don't know what you don't know. And the gifts of this program just keep giving back. Like I really haven't felt an inner serenity and peace until about year 4, and that's when I kind of stopped having expectations, so many expectations. I would in years 1 through 3, maybe 4, I would go into situations with expectations, and I still, as I think back, I would go into situations seeing, like, expecting what can I get from this situation instead of what
Right.
can I bring to this situation. And so I still went into situations like that. And then when my expectations weren't met, it would cause a resentment inside me. And that would affect my personal happiness and serenity. And around year 4, I really started realizing that. I knew it before, but wasn't able to stop it for whatever reason. I went back to my therapist once a week. Doug, I'm back at UCLA now. I'm working on becoming a licensed drug and alcohol counselor. I don't think I want to be that, but I want the credentials. And I definitely knew I wanted the knowledge. I wanted the knowledge of how chemicals affect our bodies in a negative way. And then when we get sober and clean, how our bodies can retransform. I wanted to learn motivational interviewing. I wanted to learn more strategies on relapse prevention. I wanted to be able to be a better sponsor to my sponsees, and I wanted to be able to understand this disease a lot better and have knowledge. And I wanted this happiness. And so, not only did I go back to a therapist once a week, I'm back at UCLA, just started my 3rd semester. I'm a 4.0 student at UCLA. Like I was a 2.6 student in high school. And I'm a 4.0 student at UCLA at 47 years old. It's amazing. It's like the blessings and those things working together, opening my mind to things. You don't know what you don't know, but you can learn. And as I learn more, man, I feel that, like, this smile and this excitement, this is real. This is absolutely real. So going back to school, I work a full-time job in healthcare that I've been at for over 2 years now. It's just a blessing. We often say, I'm living a life I only dreamt about. I dreamt a pretty damn some big stuff. So I'm living a really great life. Like I can't complain. I go to meetings multiple times a week, still in-person meetings. I have many sponsees. I feel blessed. I think in early recovery, I was sober, but I wasn't in recovery. And I think for many of us, we understand there's a difference. There's a difference between sobriety and recovery. Recovery is working the program, the 12 steps, being of service, giving back, sponsoring, walking, working with your sponsor, being connected. Connection is the biggest thing for me. Being a good person, just not being a douche all the time. Like, I know a lot of people that have 20, 30 years sobriety, but they have absolutely zero of anything else I want in life. Like zero. Like you're miserable. I want nothing. I want your 30 years of sobriety, but that's it. So there's a big difference. And my day to day, Doug, I wake up at 6 o'clock every morning and I go hit the gym and I do cardio for 45 minutes. I work. On my lunch break, I go back and I do weights. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm in school. So I go to UCLA either Monday or Wednesday. I'm doing homework. The weekends I have meetings. I have 16-year-old twins. A challenge, like, man, that is a big challenge in its own right. But I was in a meeting the other day and we were doing some readings and we were talking about difficulties in life. And as I was sitting and I was thinking about what's difficult in my life today, the things that I found that I could say were difficult in my life today were things that years back when I was homeless, I was talking to God and begging God for, God, please give me my kids back, my twins. God, please give me a job. God, please give me, a house, an apartment, somewhere to live. And those are the things that I found that I was like, having little, whatever problems that day or that week with. And I'm like, man, how things have changed. I begged God for these things like years ago, and now I have them. I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is my challenge today. So,
Jim,
I know our time's almost up. So I'm gonna
I,
turn this into some questions and answers. Doug, thank you
yeah,
for sharing.
I want to ask you a few questions. You have an amazing story, and I've always felt a connection with you. Since the first time like we met on Zoom. I always kind of like you. You really inspired me to do this, to take off with this. I remember calling you the one day and saying like, how when you started this, like how did it go? And you were honest with me. You said, Doug, for the first couple of years, I didn't sell anything. There was no clothing that we sold, and it takes a while to get it known, to get people like to get into this. The one thing I find interesting is you do so much to give back to the community. Is there anybody like say that when you went like to like Skid Row and you're handing out the clothes, and I've seen videos where you hand out food, and you have an army full of people that go up and down the street. Is there anybody that has like ever like you've seen like sober today that has like come up to you and said like, brother, like thank you so much, you were such an inspiration, like like I was living on the street and you came by with a t-shirt and kept me warm for that little while? Was there anybody like that?
It actually has. It has. Nobody's come up to me and said they were in Skid Row when I did that and remember had that. But I've had stories of people in treatment centers that I've gone in, and I always bring in sober AF
Mm,
for one day at a time shirts. And I'll see them in a meeting, and they'll be like, they'll walk up to me and they'll be like, "Hey, you probably don't remember me, but you spoke at here and here, and you did this, or I met you here and we were doing something, and somebody told you." We've had lots of events for my nonprofit and my businesses, and I've had multiple people come up to me and stories similar to that. Unfortunately, nobody off Skid Row.
right.
I really wish.
Not yet. Not yet.
I said I really look forward. I was going to say I really wish, and I look forward to the day that happens.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will. I spoke at a treatment center like 2 years ago, and after I was done my share, a lady asked to go. She asked if she could go get her phone, and I said sure. And she came back with her phone, and she showed me I was her screensaver, and she lived in Niagara Falls, and she had listened to every episode of Canadian Sober A. And it kind of like freaked me out a little bit because like I was like, wow, there's like a fan out there, right? Um, you know, again, you've done so much to inspire people. Why? Like I know you were homeless. You said that you were homeless. Your life was miserable. Why is it important today for Jim not only to give back, but why is it important for you to spread the message of hope and recovery out there?
You know, you're in the program, Doug. They say you can only keep it by giving it away. And so, the triangle of recovery is unity, recovery, service, and service is a huge, huge part of that. And it's not about saying it; it's about doing it. Um, People often ask me, not often, people have asked me, do you do so much nowadays because you were such an A before? And I'm not going to lie. Yeah. Some of it probably, if I wanted to dig down deep into it, some of it probably is that trying to make living amends for all the chaos and destruction I've caused previously in my life. But I have also found gifts, and people have said, hey, to keep what you have today, this is how you do it. Early
Mm,
recovery, I found my first sponsor told me, go to meetings that have men that have three aspects. This is what I recommend: men that have solid recovery, men that have solid relationships in recovery, and men that have solid successful business ventures in recovery. So that's what I went
mm,
and I grasp onto, and I listen to what they say. And they say, hey, go to that meeting. Hey, go walk up to that guy, tell him you want to be a sponsor. Hey, do this. Hey, come here, be here at this time. So it's what we do. Lots of people that
yeah,
aren't recovered don't understand it. And I'm
yeah,
glad, because that means they're not they won't, hopefully never suffered from this addiction. But
mhm,
what we do is we're of service to others. We don't ask questions. We show up when we're asked to, and that's a non-negotiable. And
yeah,
I relapsed for 2.5 years. I left that on my story, but I realized the hard way what happens when we try to do things our way. So.
right. So one other question really quick I want to get to you is when you were sharing your story, you were talking about, your t-shirt one day at a time, and you said like, if you don't do these things one day at a time, if you don't do this, so kind of explain it a little more to the guy that's sitting on his couch right now watching Jim Hernandez talk about his recovery, talk to him about if you don't do these things, we can quit drinking, right? We can quit drinking and be like miserable and kind of like whatever. But if we don't do the work, right? So talk to the person about that. Like, if you don't do the work, then you're never going to get what you have today.
That was one of my sponsees calling right now too.
Oh.
Sorry if you heard that. No, the recovery is not a one size fit all thing, and I understand that. But with me, I need that's him calling back again. I need the odds in my favor, and I realized that going to meetings, doing the work, working the steps, working with other individuals, calling your sponsor every day, you're creating new habits and you're creating positive habits in your life. And I need the odds as much in my favor as possible. So I'm going to do the work and the guidelines that's set down by the hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people before me that found what I want, which is being free from addiction and not ever drinking again and a life that I want. And they've told me this is how we do it. So, I've been thick-headed and made things difficult for way too long. And I decided to stop doing that. So for me, it's about going to meetings, and man, I like it. It's a connecting with other people, just really listening, and that's how I do it, and that's what's worked for me.
Well, oh, Jim, I really appreciate. I wish we had a gazillion other like hours to sit here and chat and talk to you. You're such an inspiration. Thank you so much for everything you do for the recovery community and everything that you've done to inspire me to keep this whole thing going. I'm being honest when I say it, Jim. Like, if it wasn't for those 5 people in that meeting, there's 5 people that in my life today that have really transformed how I do my recovery today, and you're one of the guys that helped me recover out loud. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show today, man.
The least I can do. Thank you for those words. That means a lot.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to Canadian Sober. Thanks, Jim, to our guest. Catch him, and we'll chat again some other time, buddy. Thanks so much for being here.
Appreciate it. Bye, Doug.
All right. Bye, everybody. See you later.